The contract was already signed when Claire Whitmore learned she'd been sold. Not as a bride, as payment. The Blackwood family, the American dynasty that adopted her only to discard her like damaged furniture, had traded her to the most dangerous man in the city to save themselves from ruin. Damian Cross. Mafia boss. Killer. A man whose name alone made powerful men pale. Claire stood in her childhood bedroom, the one they'd moved her to when their real daughter was born, and stared at the wedding dress they'd left on her bed like a death sentence. Tomorrow, she would belong to a monster. But before we begin, if you stay with me until the end of this story, please hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Claire's journey reaches across the world. Thus, the Blackwood mansion had always been beautiful in the way that museums were beautiful, cold, untouchable, and designed to make you feel small. Claire had lived in its shadow for 23 years, and in all that time, she'd never once felt like she belonged there. She stood now in front of the gilt-edged mirror in what used to be the guest wing, the part of the house where they'd quietly relocated her when Savannah turned 5 and started asking why the helper girl had a bedroom near hers. The room was nice enough, tasteful wallpaper, a 4-poster bed, a window that overlooked the gardens she was no longer invited to walk through. It was a gorgeous cage, and Claire had stopped rattling the bars years ago. The wedding dress hung on the back of her door, ivory silk that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Eleanor Blackwood had it custom-made, of course. Not out of love. Eleanor hadn't looked Claire in the eye in over a decade, but because appearances mattered. Even when selling off your adopted daughter to a crime lord, you did it with elegance. Claire's hands trembled as she touched the delicate lace at the bodice. In less than 12 hours, she would put this on. She would walk down the aisle of the Blackwood family chapel, the same chapel where they'd baptized Savannah and celebrated every milestone that mattered, and she would be given away like a piece of furniture neither wanted nor needed anymore. Except this time, she wasn't being given to another wealthy family for social advantage. She was being handed over to Damian Cross. The name alone was enough to make her stomach twist. Everyone in their circles knew about Damian Cross, though no one spoke about him openly. He was the kind of man who existed in whispers and warnings. The kind of power that old money families like the Blackwoods pretended didn't exist, even as they quietly borrowed from him when their portfolios crashed or their reputations needed protecting. He was American mafia royalty. Ruthless, violent, untouchable. And now he was going to be her husband. Claire sank onto the edge of her bed, her throat tight. She'd always known the Blackwoods didn't love her. She'd made peace with that years ago, but she hadn't expected them to hate her enough to do this. A soft knock broke through her thoughts. "Come in," she said quietly, though she already knew who it was. The door opened and Savannah Blackwood stepped inside, radiant as always. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and she wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost what Claire's entire wardrobe was worth. She looked like sunlight and money and everything Claire had never been allowed to be. "Claire," Savannah said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I wanted to check on you, before the big day." Claire didn't look at her. "I'm fine. Are you?" Savannah crossed the room and perched on the chair near the window, folding her hands delicately in her lap. "I mean, this must be so hard for you, leaving the family, marrying someone like him." The way she said him made it clear what she thought of Damian Cross. Distasteful, dangerous, beneath them. Ironic, considering her parents had thrown Claire at him like a sacrificial lamb. "I'll manage," Claire said flatly. Savannah tilted her head, studying her with that cool, assessing look she'd perfected over the years. I really do feel for you. I mean, if Daddy's business hadn't gone under, none of this would be necessary. But you understand, don't you? They had to make a choice." Claire's jaw tightened. "And they chose you." "Well, of course they did." Savannah's smile was blade sharp. "I'm their daughter, Claire. Their real daughter. You've always known that." The words landed exactly as intended, clean and cutting. Claire had heard variations of them her entire life, but they still stung. Maybe they always would. "I just wanted to make sure you understood," Savannah continued, rising gracefully from the chair. "This is for the best. Damian Cross gets what he wants, Daddy's business is saved, and you finally get to be useful." She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. Oh, and Claire, do try to smile tomorrow. It's your wedding day after all. The door closed softly behind her. Claire sat in the silence that followed, her hands curled into fists on her lap. She wanted to scream, she wanted to cry, she wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The Blackwoods had made sure of that. Mouse. The next morning arrived with the kind of cold, gray sky that matched Claire's mood perfectly. The house was a flurry of activity. Caterers, florists, photographers, all orchestrated by Eleanor Blackwood with military precision. The wedding was small, private, and ruthlessly efficient. No need for a grand spectacle when the bride was a transaction, and the groom was a man most of their social circle feared. Claire was dressed by a team of strangers who tugged her hair into an elegant updo and painted her face until she looked like a porcelain doll. Beautiful, blank, breakable. When they finally stepped back to admire their work, Claire barely recognized herself in the mirror. "Stunning," one of them murmured. Claire said nothing. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, immaculate in a pale blue suit, her expression unreadable. She looked at Claire the way one might appraise a piece of art before auction, clinical, detached, vaguely approving. "You look acceptable," Eleanor said. "Remember to stand straight during the ceremony, and don't fidget. Damien Cross is doing us an extraordinary favor, and I won't have you embarrassing this family." Claire met her adoptive mother's gaze in the mirror. "Of course." Eleanor's mouth thinned, but she didn't say anything else. She simply turned and left, her heels clicking sharply down the hallway. Acceptable. That was all Claire had ever been to them. And now, she wasn't even that. The chapel was small, elegant, and suffocatingly quiet. There were no guests, no friends, no one who cared whether Claire lived or died, let alone whether she wanted to marry the man waiting for her at the altar. Just the Blackwoods, seated in the front row like spectators at a business transaction. And Damien Cross's people, a handful of men in dark suits who stood along the walls like silent sentries, their faces unreadable. Claire's father, though she'd stopped thinking of Richard Blackwood as her father years ago, waited for her at the back of the chapel. He didn't meet her eyes as he offered his arm. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. She took his arm because she had no choice. The music began, something classical and hollow, and they started down the aisle. Claire kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady. She didn't look at the Blackwoods. She didn't look at the men lining the walls. She looked at Damien Cross. He stood at the altar in a black suit that fit him like it had been designed to intimidate. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly still. His dark hair was swept back and his face was all hard lines and cold control. He didn't smile, didn't soften. He watched her approach the way a predator watches prey. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't falter. She'd been raised to be composed, to be graceful, to be invisible when necessary. She could do this. Richard deposited her at the altar without a word, then returned to his seat beside Eleanor. Claire stood facing Damien Cross, and for the first time she let herself really look at him. His eyes were dark, almost black, and deeply unsettling. Not because they were cruel, but because they weren't. There was no rage in them, no violence, just a cold, watchful intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through her. The officiant began speaking, his voice a distant drone. Claire barely heard him. She was too aware of Damien's gaze, steady and unrelenting, too aware of how close he was, too aware that in a matter of minutes she would belong to him. "Do you, Claire Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. "I do," she whispered. "And do you, Damien Cross, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Damien's voice was low, steady, and impossibly calm. "I do." The officiant smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Damien stepped closer. Claire's breath caught. He reached up, his hand curving gently along her jaw, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something almost soft. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't brutal, it wasn't possessive. It was deliberate, controlled, and over far too quickly. When he pulled back, his hand lingered for just a moment against her cheek. "Mrs. Cross," he said quietly, and just like that, Claire Whitmore ceased to exist. The reception was held in the Blackwood dining room, though calling it a reception felt generous. There was champagne no one touched, hors d'oeuvres no one ate, and conversation so strained it felt like everyone was afraid to breathe too loudly. The Blackwoods sat at one end of the table, Damien's men at the other, and Claire sat beside her new husband in the middle, feeling like a bridge between two worlds that wanted nothing to do with each other. Damien hadn't spoken to her since the ceremony. He sat with the same unsettling stillness, his attention split between the room and the glass of whiskey in his hand. Claire picked at her food, her stomach too twisted to eat. Across the table, Savannah watched her with barely concealed glee, whispering something to Eleanor that made her mother's mouth curve into a thin, satisfied smile. Claire looked away. "You're not eating," Damien said suddenly. She startled, turning to find him watching her. Up close, his features were even sharper, defined cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that missed nothing. "I'm not hungry," she said quietly. He studied her for a long moment, then reached for her untouched champagne glass and moved it out of her reach. "You'll eat later," he said, "when we're alone." The words sent a chill down her spine. When we're alone. She didn't know what that meant, didn't know what he expected from her. The stories she'd heard about Damien Cross painted him as a man who took what he wanted without hesitation, who crushed anyone who stood in his way, who showed no mercy. She'd been handed to him like a debt repayment. What was she supposed to expect? Richard Blackwood cleared his throat at the head of the table, rising with his glass raised. "A toast," he said, his voice loud and false. "To Damien and Claire. May this union be prosperous for all involved." Prosperous for all involved. Not happy, not blessed, prosperous. Because that's all this was. A business deal. Everyone raised their glasses dutifully. Claire didn't touch hers. Damien did, though. He lifted his whiskey, his gaze locked on Richard with something cold and cutting. "To family," Damien said quietly. The word landed like a threat. Richard's smile faltered, but he drank anyway. Pokik. An hour later, it was over. The Blackwoods made no effort to say goodbye. Eleanor offered a stiff nod. Richard shook Damien's hand with the kind of forced civility that reeked of fear, and Savannah blew Claire a mocking little kiss as she swept out of the room. And then they were gone. Claire stood in the center of the now empty dining room, her hands folded in front of her, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Damien's men had disappeared as well, leaving just the two of them in the cavernous silence. "Come," Damien said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Claire turned to find him waiting by the door, his expression unreadable. She didn't argue. She didn't ask where they were going. She simply followed. Damien's car was sleek, black, and deeply intimidating, much like the man himself. Claire slid into the back seat, her wedding dress pooling around her like a cloud of silk and lace. Damien settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, and the driver pulled away from the Blackwood estate without a word. They drove in silence. Claire watched the familiar streets blur past, her chest tight. She'd lived her entire life within a 10-mile radius of the Blackwood mansion. She'd never traveled, never been allowed to. And now she was leaving it all behind, not because she wanted to, because she'd been sold. "You're afraid of me," Damien said suddenly. Claire's breath caught. She turned to find him watching her, his expression calm but his gaze sharp. She didn't know how to answer that. Yes? No? Did it matter? "You should be," he continued, his voice low and even. "Most people are." Claire swallowed hard. "Are you going to hurt me?" The question hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Damien's jaw tightened, and for a moment something dark flickered across his face. "No," he said finally. "I'm not." "Then what do you want from me?" He leaned back against the seat, his gaze never leaving hers. "Everything," he said simply. The words sent a shiver down her spine. "I didn't ask for this," Claire said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I didn't want—" "I know." His tone was softer now, almost gentle. "You think I don't know what they did to you? What they've been doing to you for years?" Claire's throat tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "I know more than you think," Damien said. "I know you were adopted when you were 5. I know they paraded you around like a prize until their biological daughter was born. I know they shoved you into the background the moment Savannah smiled for the first time. I know they've treated you like staff for most of your life. And I know they sold you to me the second they needed money more than they needed appearances. Claire stared at him, her heart racing. How? I make it my business to know things, Damien said, especially when it involves the people I do business with. And the Blackwoods? His mouth curved into something cold and humorless. They've been on my radar for a long time. Then why did you agree to this? Claire demanded, her voice rising. If you knew what they were doing, why did you? Because you deserve better than them, Damien said, his voice cutting through hers like a blade. And because I wanted you. The confession hit her like a physical blow. You wanted me? Claire repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Damien's gaze softened, just slightly. I've been watching you for 2 years, Claire. Every charity event, every gallery opening, every time they dragged you out to prove they were still a respectable family, I saw you, standing in the corner, invisible, ignored. Claire's hands trembled in her lap. I don't understand. You will, Damien said. In time. The car slowed and Claire glanced out the window to find they'd arrived at a towering building in the heart of the city, modern, sleek, and impossibly expensive. This is home now, Damien said, opening the door and stepping out. Claire hesitated, then took the hand he offered. And as she stepped out of the car and into the unknown, one thought echoed through her mind. What have I gotten myself into? Oh, Damien's penthouse was everything the Blackwood mansion wasn't. Where the Blackwoods worshipped tradition and old-world elegance, Damien's space was modern, sharp, and unapologetically powerful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, sleek furniture filled the open-concept living area, and everything, from the marble floors to the custom lighting, screamed wealth that didn't need to prove itself. Claire stood in the center of the room, still wearing her wedding dress, feeling completely out of place. Your room is upstairs, Damien said, shrugging out of his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a chair. Second door on the left. You'll find everything you need. Claire blinked. My room? He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. You didn't think I'd force you into mine, did you? She didn't know what to think. I'm not a monster, Claire, Damien said, his voice quieter now. Despite what you've been told. Then what are you? She asked, her voice trembling. Damien crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of her. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. I'm the man who's going to make sure no one ever hurts you again, he said. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Claire believed him. That night, Claire lay awake in a bed that wasn't hers, in a room that didn't feel real, staring at the ceiling. Damien Cross wasn't what she'd expected. He was dangerous, yes, powerful, absolutely. But he wasn't cruel, he wasn't violent, he was careful with her. And that terrified her more than anything else, because Claire had spent her entire life learning how to survive cruelty. She knew how to make herself small, how to disappear, how to endure. But kindness was something she didn't know how to handle. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she said quietly. The door opened and Damien stepped inside, still wearing his dress shirt and slacks, though he'd rolled up his sleeves. He carried a tray with a plate of food and a glass of water. You didn't eat, he said simply, setting the tray on the bedside table. Claire sat up, pulling the blanket around her. I told you, I'm not hungry. I know. Damien sat on the edge of the bed, his expression unreadable. Eat anyway. It wasn't a command. It was a request. Claire reached for the plate, simple pasta, nothing fancy, and took a small bite. Damien watched her in silence. Why are you doing this? Claire asked after a moment. Because you're my wife now, Damien said, and I take care of what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Claire woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows she didn't recognize, in a bed softer than anything she'd ever slept in, wearing silk pajamas she had no memory of changing into. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The wedding, the vows, Damien Cross. She sat up slowly, her heart racing, and found a note on the bedside table written in sharp, precise handwriting. Breakfast is downstairs. Take your time. No signature. It didn't need one. Claire showered in a bathroom larger than her old bedroom at the Blackwood estate, using products that smelled like vanilla and something expensive she couldn't name. The closet, because of course there was a walk-in closet attached to her room, was filled with clothes in her exact size. Cashmere sweaters, designer jeans, dresses that cost more than the Blackwoods had spent on her in years. She chose simple black pants and a cream-colored blouse, then made her way downstairs. The penthouse looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more lived in. Damien sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and a tablet, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," Claire replied, her voice still rough with sleep. He gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit. Eat." The counter was laid out with more food than two people could possibly consume. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, bacon, toast. Claire slid onto the stool and reached for a piece of toast, hyper-aware of how close he was. They ate in silence for several minutes before Damien spoke. "We need to talk about expectations," he said, setting down his coffee. Claire's stomach tightened. Here it was, the part where he told her what he really wanted, what she'd really been traded for. "I'm listening," she said carefully. Damien turned to face her fully, his dark eyes steady. "You're not a prisoner here, Claire. You're free to come and go as you please. You'll have access to everything, credit cards, cars, security when you need it. This penthouse is yours as much as it is mine." She stared at him. "I don't understand." "What's not to understand?" "You paid off the Blackwoods' debt," Claire said slowly. "You married me. You own me. Why would you give me freedom?" Something dangerous flickered across Damien's face. "I don't own you," he said, his voice dropping to something cold and sharp. "You're not property, Claire. You're my wife." "A wife you bought." "A wife I chose," Damien corrected. "There's a difference." Claire set down her toast, her hands trembling slightly. "Then what do you want from me?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, studying her with that unsettling intensity that made her feel exposed. "I want you to live," he said finally. "I want you to stop being invisible. I want you to realize that you're worth more than they ever let you believe." The words hit her like a physical blow. "And in return," she whispered. "In return, you stay," Damien said simply. "You be my wife. You stand beside me. You let me protect you." "That's all?" His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "For now." Before Claire could respond, Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "I have a meeting," he said, standing. "Marcus will be here within the hour. He's head of security. He'll take you anywhere you want to go today." "I don't need Yes, you do," Damien said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're across now. That comes with protection whether you like it or not." He crossed to where she sat, and for a moment Claire thought he might touch her. Instead, he simply looked at her, his gaze softer than it had been a moment ago. "The world I live in is dangerous, Claire," he said quietly. "I won't apologize for keeping you safe." Then he was gone, leaving Claire alone with half-eaten breakfast and 1,000 questions she didn't know how to ask. Marcus arrived exactly an hour later, a mountain of a man with kind eyes and a subtle earpiece. He introduced himself with a nod and a respectful "Mrs. Cross," which made Claire's stomach flip every time she heard it. "Where would you like to go today?" he asked. Claire almost said nowhere, almost told him she was fine staying in the penthouse, hiding from a world that had never been kind to her. But then she remembered Damien's words. "I want you to live." "The art museum," she said. "Downtown." Marcus nodded. "Good choice. I'll bring the car around." The museum had always been Claire's escape when the Blackwoods dragged her to charity events. While Eleanor networked and Savannah posed for photos, Claire would slip away to wander the galleries, losing herself in paintings and sculptures that demanded to be seen. She'd always envied them. The art. So boldly visible, so unapologetically present. Now, walking through the familiar halls with Marcus trailing at a respectful distance, Claire felt different. People looked at her, not with pity or dismissal, but with curiosity. The clothes Damien had provided were understated but clearly expensive. The car that had dropped her off was impossible to miss. and Marcus himself commanded attention simply by existing. She was visible in a way she'd never been before. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Claire stopped in front of a massive canvas, abstract, chaotic, beautiful in its refusal to be contained. She'd stood in this same spot dozens of times, but today it felt different. "Mrs. Cross?" She turned to find a woman approaching, mid-40s, elegant, with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said. "I'm Diana Castellano. I sit on the museum's board, and I couldn't help but notice, are you Damien Cross's new wife?" Claire's throat went dry. Yes, I am." Diana's smile widened. "How wonderful. Welcome to the family, dear. The Cross name carries considerable weight in this city. I'm sure you'll find yourself quite popular." Before Claire could respond, Diana pressed a business card into her hand. "We're hosting a gala next month. I do hope you'll attend. It would mean so much to have you there." She swept away before Claire could form a coherent response, leaving her standing alone with the card clutched in her hand. Mrs. Cross. The Cross name. Popular. None of it felt real. By the time Claire returned to the penthouse that evening, her head was spinning. Marcus had taken her to 3 more places: a bookstore where she'd bought more novels than she could carry, a cafe where the barista had smiled at her like she mattered, a boutique where the owner had insisted on showing her their entire collection. Everywhere she went, people treated her differently. Not because they knew her, but because they knew whose name she carried now. Damien was waiting when she walked in, lounging on the couch with a glass of whiskey and an expression that might have been amusement. "I heard you had an eventful day," he said. Claire set down her shopping bags and turned to face him. "People kept staring at me." "You're beautiful and you're married to me," Damien said matter-of-factly. "They'll stare." "I'm not used to it." "You will be." He stood, crossing to where she stood. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I did, actually." Something warm flickered in Damien's eyes. "Good." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something Claire couldn't name. "Diana Castellano invited me to a gala," she said finally. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did she?" "She said I'd be popular now, because of your name." "She's not wrong," Damien said. "My world is full of sharks, Claire. They'll circle you, try to figure out what you mean to me, how they can use you." "And what do I mean to you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive. "Everything I said last night," he murmured, "and more than you're ready to hear yet." Claire's breath caught. "We'll go to the gala," Damien continued, his voice dropping lower. "I'll introduce you properly. Show them that you're untouchable." "I don't know how to be untouchable," Claire admitted. Damien's hand came up, his fingers brushing lightly against her jaw. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. "Then I'll teach you." "What?" The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of transformation that left Claire dizzy. Damien kept his word about freedom. She could go anywhere, do anything, and Marcus was always there, silent, watchful, protective. But Damien himself was often absent, disappearing for hours or days at a time for business he never fully explained. When he was home, though, everything shifted. He'd appear in the evenings with dinner from restaurants Claire had only read about, insisting they eat together. He'd ask about her day, actually listen to her answers, remember small details she'd mentioned in passing. He bought her books she'd looked at in stores, arranged for a piano to be delivered when she'd mentioned missing playing, had fresh flowers placed in her room every morning. It was overwhelming, confusing, and deeply, dangerously intoxicating. Because for the first time in her life, someone was paying attention to her. Not as an obligation or an inconvenience, but because he wanted to. "You're thinking too hard," Damien said one evening. They were sitting on the penthouse balcony, the city glittering below them. Claire had been staring at the skyline for the past 10 minutes, lost in thought. "I'm trying to understand you," she admitted. "What's to understand?" "All of this." She gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at him, at the life she still couldn't quite believe was hers. "You could have anyone. Why me?" Damien set down his drink, turning to face her fully. "Do you remember the Vanderbilt Foundation Gala? 2 years ago?" Claire frowned. "I think so." Eleanor made me go. I spent most of the night in the sculpture garden. I know, Damien said quietly. I was there too. I watched you stand alone for 3 hours while your family socialized inside. You looked at those sculptures like they were the only real things in the room. Claire's chest tightened. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Claire, Damien said, his voice low and intense. I remember the way you flinched when Eleanor snapped at you. I remember how Savannah ignored you completely. I remember thinking that you were the most beautiful woman in the room and no one even noticed you existed. Damien, I've spent 2 years watching them break you down piece by piece, he continued, his jaw tight. And I've spent 2 years waiting for the right moment to take you away from them. Claire stared at him, her heart pounding. This was planned? All of it? The debt was real, Damien said. But I made sure Richard came to me when he needed money. I made sure I was the only option. Why? Because you deserved better than them, Damien said fiercely. And because I wanted you safe. With me. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and absolutely terrifying. I don't know how to be what you want, Claire whispered. Damien reached out, his hand cupping her face gently. You already are. And when he kissed her, slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world, Claire stopped thinking altogether. The night of the gala arrived with all the weight of a coronation. Claire stood in front of the mirror in her room, barely recognizing herself. The dress Damien had chosen was stunning, deep emerald silk that clung to her curves and made her skin glow. Her hair was swept up elegantly, and the diamond necklace around her throat probably cost more than the Blackwood's entire estate. She looked powerful, confident, nothing like the invisible girl who'd spent her life in the shadows. You look incredible, Damien said from the doorway. Claire turned to find him watching her, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a dangerous fantasy. I'm terrified, she admitted. Damien crossed to her, taking her hands in his. You don't need to be. I'll be right beside you the entire time. What if I mess up, say the wrong thing? Then we'll leave, Damien said simply. Claire, these people don't matter. Their opinions don't matter. The only thing that matters is that you feel comfortable. She looked up at him. This man who'd turned her entire world upside down in a matter of weeks. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me. Damien's expression softened in a way she was beginning to recognize. Always. The gala was held in a historic hotel downtown, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors, and people dripping in wealth. Claire walked in on Damien's arm, her head high despite the nerves eating at her stomach. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped, heads turned, people stared. Damien's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on hers. Breathe, he murmured. Claire did. They moved through the crowd slowly, Damien introducing her to what felt like hundreds of people. Politicians, business owners, socialites, people who smiled warmly and shook her hand and looked at her like she mattered. It was surreal. Damien Cross, Spa, a smooth voice called out. As I live and breathe. Claire turned to see a man approaching. Handsome, mid-30s, with the kind of easy charm that felt practiced. He clapped Damien on the shoulder like they were old friends, though Damien's expression remained carefully neutral. Vincent, Damien said evenly. I didn't know you were in town. Flew in this morning, Vincent said, then turned his attention to Claire. And who is this vision? My wife, Damien said, his tone dropping to something possessive. Claire, this is Vincent Moretti. We do business occasionally. Vincent's smile widened as he took Claire's hand, bringing it to his lips. Mrs. Cross. The pleasure is entirely mine. Claire forced a polite smile, though something about Vincent made her deeply uncomfortable. I must admit I was shocked to hear you'd gotten married, Vincent continued, still holding her hand. Damien's always been so selective about who he lets close. Claire is exceptional, Damien said coldly, gently removing her hand from Vincent's grasp. If you'll excuse us. He guided Claire away before Vincent could respond, his hand firm on her lower back. Who was that? Claire asked quietly. No one you need to worry about, Damien said, though his jaw was tight. Before Claire could press further, a familiar voice cut through the crowd like a knife. Claire, oh my God, Claire! No, it couldn't be. But when Claire turned, her worst fear was confirmed. Savannah Blackwood stood 10 feet away, radiant in a white cocktail dress, her expression perfectly calibrated between shock and delight. And behind her, looking like they'd swallowed nails, were Richard and Eleanor. "Savannah," Claire said, her voice barely steady. Savannah rushed forward, throwing her arms around Claire in a hug that felt like a threat. "I can't believe you're here. We had no idea you'd be attending." "Neither did I," Claire said, stepping back as quickly as she could. Eleanor approached next, her smile brittle. "Claire, you look... well." "Mrs. Blackwood," Damien said, his voice dangerously soft. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited." "Diana Castellano is an old family friend," Eleanor said, her chin lifting. "We've been attending this gala for years." The tension was thick enough to cut. Richard stood behind his wife, looking deeply uncomfortable, while Savannah watched the exchange with barely concealed amusement. "Well, isn't this lovely?" Savannah said brightly. "A family reunion." "We're not family," Claire said before she could stop herself. The words landed like a bomb. Savannah's smile faltered. Eleanor's expression went ice cold. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. "Claire," Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "That's hardly—" "She's right," Damien said, stepping forward slightly. "You stopped being her family the moment you sold her to me. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have people to meet." He guided Claire away, leaving the Blackwoods standing in stunned silence. Claire's hands were shaking. "Breathe," Damien murmured again, leading her toward the balcony. The cool night air hit her face like a blessing. Claire gripped the balcony railing, her chest heaving. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have said that. I embarrassed you." "You were perfect," Damien said firmly, turning her to face him. "You stood up for yourself. Don't apologize for that. They'll never forgive me." "Good," Damien said, his eyes blazing. "Let them choke on it." Claire stared at him, and something inside her chest cracked open. Something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. "Thank you," she whispered. Damien's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "You don't need to thank me for protecting you, Claire. It's what I'm here for." "Is that all I am to you?" she asked, the question slipping out raw and vulnerable. "Someone to protect?" Damien's expression shifted, something dark and hungry moving through his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "You're so much more than that." "Then what—" He kissed her before she could finish the question, his mouth claiming hers with an intensity that stole her breath. It wasn't gentle like before. It was possessive, demanding, and absolutely devastating. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "You're mine, Claire," Damien said, his voice rough. "Not because I bought you, not because we're married, but because I choose you every single day." And standing there on that balcony, wrapped in the arms of a man who'd pulled her from the darkness, Claire finally understood. She wasn't invisible anymore. She never would be again. The drive home from the gala was silent, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence Claire had grown accustomed to in her old life. This was different. Charged, electric, weighted with unspoken promises that made her skin feel too tight, and her heart race in ways she didn't quite understand yet. Damien's hand rested on her thigh, possessive and warm, and Claire didn't pull away. She couldn't, not after that kiss on the balcony. Not after the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. When they arrived at the penthouse, Damien helped her out of the car with a gentleness that contradicted the intensity burning in his eyes. Marcus nodded and disappeared into the night, leaving them alone in the private elevator that carried them up to their floor. Claire could feel Damien watching her in the mirrored walls, his gaze tracing the line of her bare shoulders, the curve of her neck. She met his eyes in the reflection and saw something that made her breath catch. Hunger, yes, but also something fiercer, something that looked almost like reverence. The elevator doors opened. They stepped into the penthouse, and the air between them crackled with tension so thick Claire could barely breathe through it. "Claire," Damien said, his voice low and rough. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Yes?" He crossed to her slowly, deliberately, like he was giving her time to run if she wanted to. But Claire didn't move. Couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, watching him approach with wide eyes and trembling hands. When he reached her, he didn't touch her immediately. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. "And I will." Claire's throat went dry. "What if I don't want you to stop?" Something dark and dangerous flashed across Damien's face. "Then I need you to understand something first," he said, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. "Once I have you, Claire, I won't let you go. Ever. You'll be mine in every way that matters. Do you understand?" She should have been terrified, should have run, but all she felt was a fierce, overwhelming need to be claimed by this man who'd seen her when no one else had. "I understand," she whispered. Damien's control snapped. He kissed her hard, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her flush against him. Claire gasped against his mouth, and he took immediate advantage, deepening the kiss until she forgot how to think, how to breathe, how to be anything but his. He broke away only long enough to murmur against her lips, "Mine." "Yours," Claire agreed, and it felt like a vow. The rest of the night blurred into sensation and heat and a connection that went far deeper than physical. When Claire finally fell asleep in Damien's arms, in his bed, not the guest room, she felt safe in a way she'd never experienced before. She felt home. Claire woke to an empty bed in a moment of panic before she heard sounds coming from the bathroom. She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, and took in her surroundings properly for the first time. Damien's bedroom was massive, all dark wood and masculine lines, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. It felt nothing like the sterile guest room she'd been staying in. It felt like him, strong, powerful, unapologetic. The bathroom door opened and Damien emerged wearing only a towel slung low on his hips, water still beading on his skin. Claire's mouth went dry. He smiled, actually smiled, something rare and devastating when he saw her watching him. "Good morning." "Morning," Claire managed, her voice rough. Damien crossed to the bed, leaning down to kiss her slowly, thoroughly. "How do you feel?" "Different," she admitted. "Good different." "Good," he murmured against her lips. "Stay here. I'll bring you breakfast." He disappeared before Claire could protest, leaving her alone in his space. She slipped out of bed, pulling on his discarded shirt from the night before, and wandered to the windows. The city sprawled below her, bustling and alive, and for the first time in her life, Claire felt like she was part of it instead of watching from the outside. Her phone, the new one Damien had given her shortly after the wedding, buzzed on the nightstand. Claire picked it up, frowning at the unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello?" "Claire." Eleanor's voice was ice cold. "We need to talk." Claire's entire body went rigid. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "Don't you dare hang up on me," Eleanor snapped. "After that embarrassing display last night, you owe me at least a conversation." "I owe you nothing," Claire said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "You ungrateful little—" Eleanor cut herself off, taking a sharp breath. "I don't know what Damien Cross has told you, but you're still a Blackwood. You're still our daughter, and you will show us respect." Claire laughed, actually laughed, and it felt like breaking chains. "I was never your daughter, Eleanor. You made that abundantly clear my entire life. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, gave you opportunities. You used me," Claire interrupted, her voice hardening. "You paraded me around when it suited you and shoved me in the shadows the moment Savannah was born. You treated me like help in my own home, and then you sold me like I was property. So no, Eleanor, you don't get to call me your daughter now." There was a shocked silence on the other end. "You've changed," Eleanor said finally, her voice tight. "He's changed you." "He freed me," Claire corrected. "There's a difference." "Claire, please," Eleanor said. And was that actual desperation in her voice? "We made mistakes, I admit that. But we're still family, and family should—" "We're not family," Claire said firmly. "We never were. Goodbye, Eleanor." She hung up before her former adoptive mother could respond, her hands shaking but her resolve solid as steel. Damien appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray, his expression dark. "What happened?" "Eleanor called," Claire said, setting down the phone. "I told her we're not family." Damien set down the tray and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. How do you feel? Powerful, Claire admitted, surprised by the truth of it. Like I can finally breathe. Good, Damien said fiercely. That's exactly how you should feel. They ate breakfast together in bed, something Claire had never done in her life. And for a while, everything felt perfect, easy, right. Then Damien's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting to something carefully neutral. I need to take this, he said apologetically. Work. Claire nodded, watching as he stepped onto the balcony. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he listened. When he came back inside, his expression was shuttered. I have to go out of town, he said, just for a few days. Business that can't wait. Claire's stomach sank, but she forced a smile. Okay. Damien cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. Marcus will stay with you. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me immediately. Understand? I'll be fine, Claire said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Promise me you'll be careful, Damien insisted. The Blackwoods are desperate, Claire. Desperate people do stupid things. I promise. He kissed her one more time, deep and possessive, before leaving her alone in the penthouse that suddenly felt far too empty. The first day without Damien was manageable. Claire spent it reading, playing the piano he'd bought her, trying not to think about how quickly she'd become dependent on his presence. The second day was harder. She ventured out with Marcus to a gallery opening, but everywhere she went, people whispered. Some looked at her with admiration, others with speculation, a few with barely concealed jealousy. By the third day, Claire was climbing the walls. Mrs. Cross, Marcus said that afternoon, his tone apologetic. There's someone here to see you. Claire looked up from her book, frowning. Who? Savannah Blackwood. Every muscle in Claire's body tensed. Tell her I'm not available. She says it's urgent, family emergency. Claire's first instinct was to refuse, but something in Marcus's expression made her pause. He looked concerned, which was unusual for a man who prided himself on appearing unshakable. Fine, Claire said, standing, but you stay in the room. Marcus nodded. Savannah was waiting in the living room, and for once, she didn't look perfectly put together. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged, her designer dress wrinkled. She looked almost desperate. Claire, Savannah said, standing quickly. Thank you for seeing me. What do you want? Claire asked coldly, keeping her distance. Savannah's eyes filled with tears. Real tears, which was shocking enough to make Claire pause. It's Dad. He's in the hospital. Heart attack. The doctors say it's serious. Claire's chest tightened despite herself. I'm sorry, but I don't see what that has to do with me. He's asking for you, Savannah said, her voice breaking. He wants to apologize for everything. Please, Claire. He might not have much time. Claire looked at Marcus, who stood silently by the door, his expression carefully neutral. She knew what Damien would say. He'd tell her it was a trap. He'd tell her to stay away from the Blackwoods no matter what. But despite everything they'd done, a small part of Claire still remembered being 5 years old and having Richard swing her around in the garden, calling her his little girl. Before Savannah. Before everything changed. Which hospital? Claire asked quietly. Relief flooded Savannah's face. Mercy General, I can take you. My car's outside. Marcus stepped forward immediately. Mrs. Cross, perhaps I should drive. It's fine, Marcus, Claire said, making a decision she'd probably regret. It's just a hospital visit. What could happen? Marcus's expression suggested he could think of several things, but he nodded. I'll follow in our car. That's not necessary, Savannah said quickly. Really, we'll be perfectly safe. But Marcus was already pulling out his phone, and Claire was grateful for it. Damien had told her to be careful, and having backup seemed wise. The drive to the hospital was quiet. Savannah kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, looking genuinely distraught. Claire studied her from the passenger seat, trying to reconcile this vulnerable version with the calculating woman who'd tormented her for years. I know you hate me, Savannah said suddenly. I don't blame you. I was awful to you. Claire didn't respond. I was jealous, Savannah continued. You were there first. You had their attention, their love, and then I came along and everything shifted. I should have been happy to have a sister, but instead I just resented you, and I made you pay for it. Why are you telling me this now? Claire asked quietly. Because watching Dad almost die made me realize how much time I've wasted being cruel, Savannah said, her voice thick with emotion. And because I want to make things right. If you'll let me. They pulled up to a building, but something felt wrong. Claire looked around, frowning. This wasn't Mercy General. This was some kind of industrial district, all warehouses and empty lots. Savannah? Claire said slowly, ice flooding her veins. Where are we? Savannah's tears dried up instantly, her expression shifting to something cold and triumphant. Somewhere private, where we can have a real conversation. Claire reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't open. Child locks. Panic surged through her. Marcus, she shouted, spinning to look out the back window. But Marcus's car wasn't behind them, because Savannah had taken a different route, had lost him deliberately. Relax, Claire, Savannah said, pulling into a warehouse. We just want to talk. The car stopped. The warehouse door rolled shut behind them, plunging them into dim light. And when Claire looked up, her blood turned to ice. Eleanor and Richard stood waiting, very much alive and healthy. And they weren't alone. 3 men in dark suits flanked them, their expressions coldly professional. Hello, Claire, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Thank you for making this so easy. Claire's hand flew to her purse, searching for her phone. But Savannah was faster, ripping it from her grasp and tossing it to one of the men, who crushed it under his heel. Did you really think we'd just let you go? Richard asked, his voice harder than Claire had ever heard it. After you humiliated us? After you chose him over your own family? You're not my family, Claire said, forcing her voice to stay steady even as terror clawed at her throat. You never were. Ungrateful little bitch, Eleanor spat, all pretense of civility gone. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. One of the men grabbed Claire's arm, yanking her from the car. She stumbled, her heels catching on the concrete, but he held her upright with bruising force. Let me go! Claire struggled against his grip, but he was far stronger. Here's what's going to happen, Eleanor said, circling Claire like a predator. You're going to call Damien Cross. You're going to tell him you're leaving him, that you've realized you made a mistake and you want an annulment. I'll never do that, Claire said fiercely. Yes, you will, Richard said. Because if you don't, we're going to destroy you. We have photos, Claire. Very compromising photos that we'll send to every news outlet in the city. Photos that will make it look like you were unfaithful to your new husband. Claire's stomach dropped. You're lying. Am I? Savannah pulled out her phone, showing Claire a series of images. They were clearly doctored, Claire's face photoshopped onto someone else's body in various compromising positions with men she'd never met. But they looked real enough to be damaging. You think Damien Cross will keep protecting you after these hit the news? Eleanor asked, her smile vicious. You think he'll still want you when everyone thinks you're a whore? He'll know they're fake, Claire said, though her voice wavered. Will he? Richard challenged. Or will he wonder? Will he question whether you've been playing him all along? Men like Damien Cross don't forgive betrayal, real or perceived. We're not asking for much, Savannah said, her tone almost reasonable. Just walk away, give us back what you took from us. I didn't take anything from you, Claire said, anger cutting through her fear. You threw me away and I found something better. That's not theft, that's survival. Eleanor's hand cracked across Claire's face so hard she saw stars. You don't get to talk to us like that. You don't get to act like you're better than us now just because you spread your legs for a criminal. The man holding Claire's arm tightened his grip when she tried to lunge forward. Her cheek throbbed where Eleanor had struck her, but the pain only fueled her rage. Damien is 10 times the person any of you will ever be, Claire spat. And when he finds out what you've done, he won't find out, Richard interrupted, because you're going to do exactly what we say. You're going to leave him. And in exchange, these photos disappear and you walk away with a generous settlement, enough to start over somewhere far from here. And if I refuse? Then we release the photos, destroy your reputation, and make sure Damien Cross knows exactly what kind of woman he married, Eleanor said coldly. The choice is yours, Claire, but choose wisely. You don't have much time. Claire's mind raced. She thought about Damien, about the way he'd looked at her last night, the promises he'd made. She thought about Marcus, who was probably tearing the city apart looking for her right now. She thought about the life she'd only just started to build, the freedom she'd only just begun to taste. And she realized something crucial. She wasn't the same frightened girl who'd been forced into a wedding dress 3 weeks ago. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't powerless. She was Damien Cross's wife. And that meant something. "No," Claire said, lifting her chin despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm not doing any of it." Eleanor's expression twisted with rage. "You stupid girl." "I'm not stupid," Claire interrupted, "and I'm not scared of you anymore. Damien will find me, and when he does, you're all going to regret this." "Bold words for someone in your position," Richard said darkly. He nodded to one of the men. "Lock her in the back office. We'll give her a few hours to reconsider." Claire was dragged across the warehouse floor, fighting every step. They threw her into a small office and slammed the door, the lock clicking ominously. She was alone in the darkness, her face aching, her body trembling with adrenaline. But she wasn't afraid, because she knew, with absolute certainty, that Damien would come for her. He always kept his promises. Hours passed. Claire had no way of knowing how many. The office had no windows, no clock, just darkness and silence and the steady drip of water somewhere in the building. She'd searched every inch of the small space looking for anything useful. The desk drawers were empty. The phone line was dead. There was nothing she could use as a weapon, nothing she could use to escape. So she sat on the floor, her back against the wall, and waited. She thought about Damien, about the way he'd held her last night, the promises he'd whispered against her skin. She thought about the life they were building together, the person she was becoming beside him. She wouldn't let the Blackwoods take that away. Not now. Not ever. The sound of shouting pulled her from her thoughts. Claire scrambled to her feet, pressing her ear against the door. Gunshots. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the warehouse, followed by screaming and the sound of running feet. Claire's heart leaped into her throat. It could be the police, it could be Marcus, or it could be Damien. More gunshots, closer now. Then a roar that made the hair on the back of Claire's neck stand up. "Where is she?" Damien's voice, rough with fury, and something that sounded like fear. Claire pounded on the door. "I'm here! Damien, I'm here!" Footsteps thundered toward her. The lock shattered under a single kick, and then the door flew open. Damien stood in the doorway, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt splattered with blood, his eyes wild and desperate. When he saw her, something in his expression cracked. "Claire," he breathed, and then she was in his arms, crushed against his chest so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm okay," she whispered, even though she was shaking. "I'm okay." Damien pulled back just enough to cup her face, his eyes searching hers frantically. When he saw the bruise blooming on her cheek, his expression went absolutely murderous. "Who touched you?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Eleanor," Claire admitted. "But Damien, they were going to—" "I know," he interrupted, his jaw tight. "Marcus tracked your phone before they destroyed it. We heard everything." He'd heard everything, which meant he knew about the photos, the threats, all of it. "The photos are fake," Claire said quickly. "I swear, Damien, I would never—" "I know that too," Damien said, his thumb brushing gently over her uninjured cheek. "Did you really think I'd believe them over you?" Relief flooded through her so intensely her knees nearly gave out. Damien caught her, holding her steady. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you out of here." He led her out of the office, keeping her tucked against his side. The warehouse floor was chaos. Damien's men had the Blackwoods and their hired muscle on their knees, hands behind their heads. Marcus stood guard, his expression grim but relieved when he saw Claire. "Mrs. Cross," he said, nodding, "I'm sorry. They lost us at the third intersection." "It's not your fault," Claire said, but Damien wasn't listening. He was staring at Eleanor, Richard, and Savannah with an expression that promised retribution. "You made a mistake," Damien said, his voice carrying across the warehouse. "A fatal one." "Damien, please," Richard started, his face pale. "We can work this out. We can—" "You kidnapped my wife," Damien interrupted, his tone conversational but laced with violence. "You threatened her. You put your hands on her." His gaze slid to Eleanor, cold and merciless. "You hit her." Eleanor's face had gone white. "There is no working this out," Damien continued. "There is no negotiation. There is only consequences." "What are you going to do?" Savannah asked, her voice trembling. Damien smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Claire had ever seen. I'm going to take everything from you. Every business deal, every asset, every connection. I'm going to dismantle your lives piece by piece until there's nothing left but the memory of what you used to be. You can't, Richard protested. I already have, Damien said. While you were busy playing games with my wife, I was buying up every debt you owe, every property you own, every favor you've called in over the years. As of an hour ago, the Blackwood name is worthless, and by tomorrow morning, everyone in this city will know exactly what you tried to do. The Blackwoods stared at him in horror. But that's not all, Damien continued, pulling Claire closer. You're going to face criminal charges, kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy, and I'm going to make sure you serve every single day of your sentences. This is insane, Eleanor whispered. Over a girl you barely know. She's my wife, Damien snarled. She's mine, and you should have known better than to touch what belongs to me. He turned to Marcus. Take them to the police. Make sure every charge sticks. With pleasure, Marcus said. Damien guided Claire toward the exit, but she paused, looking back at the three people who'd made her life hell for so long. They looked small now, powerless, broken. And Claire felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, just a profound sense of freedom. Goodbye, she said quietly. And this time she meant it. The penthouse felt different when they returned. Claire stood in the center of the living room, still wearing the dress she'd put on that morning, now wrinkled and stained, and watched Damien dismiss his men with quiet efficiency. Marcus was the last to leave, pausing at the door to meet Claire's eyes. I'm sorry I lost you, Mrs. Cross, he said, genuine regret in his voice. You found me, Claire replied softly. That's what matters. After Marcus left, the silence stretched between them like a living thing. Damien stood by the windows, his back to her, tension radiating from every line of his body. The blood on his shirt had dried to rust-colored stains. His knuckles were split and bruised. He looked like he'd walked through hell to get to her, because he had. Damien? Claire said quietly. He turned, and the look in his eyes stole her breath, raw, vulnerable, absolutely devastated. When Marcus called and told me you were gone, Damien said, his voice rough, I thought... He stopped, his jaw clenching. I've faced down armed enemies without flinching. I've survived things that would break most men, but the thought of losing you, Claire, that terrified me. Claire crossed to him, her hands finding his face. I'm here. I'm safe. Because I got there in time, Damien said fiercely. But what if I hadn't? What if they'd... He couldn't finish the sentence. But you did, Claire insisted. You came for me, just like you promised. Damien pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. Claire felt his heart hammering against her cheek, felt the tremor in his hands as they stroked through her hair. I need you to understand something, Damien said into her hair. What I told the Blackwoods wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I'm going to destroy them, Claire, completely, utterly. And I need to know you're okay with that. Claire pulled back to look at him. You're asking my permission? I'm asking if you can live with the consequences, Damien said. They're going to lose everything. Their fortune, their reputation, their freedom. When I'm done with them, they'll have nothing, and the whole city will know exactly what they did to you. A month ago, the thought would have terrified her. Claire had spent her entire life trying not to make waves, not to draw attention, not to cause problems. But standing there in Damien's arms, her face still aching from Eleanor's slap, she felt something shift inside her chest. Good, she said firmly. Let them lose everything. Let everyone know what they are. Something fierce and proud flashed in Damien's eyes. That's my girl, he murmured, then kissed her with an intensity that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, Damien's expression had shifted to something gentler. Come on, he said, taking her hand. Let's get you cleaned up. He led her upstairs to his bathroom, their bathroom now, she supposed, and started the massive rainfall shower. Claire stood watching him, still processing everything that had happened. Can I ask you something? She said as he tested the water temperature. Anything? How did you buy up all their assets so quickly? You were out of town when this happened. Damien's mouth curved into something dark and satisfied. I started the process weeks ago. The moment you told me Eleanor had called, I knew they'd try something, so I made sure I had every piece in place to destroy them the second they made their move. You've been planning this? I've been preparing for every possible scenario, Damien corrected. The Blackwoods are predictable. Desperate, greedy, and predictable. I knew they'd try to get you back or hurt you to hurt me, so I made sure I could end them if they did. He helped her out of her dress, his touch gentle, despite the violence still simmering in his eyes. When he saw the bruises forming on her arm where the guard had grabbed her, his expression went cold. Names, he said quietly. I want the names of everyone who touched you. Damien. Names, Claire. She told him, watched as he committed each one to memory, his jaw tight. Then he helped her into the shower, washing away the fear and dirt and memory of the warehouse with careful hands. I should have been here, he said, his voice thick with regret. I should have known they'd try something while I was gone. You couldn't have known, Claire said, turning to face him under the spray. And you came for me. That's what matters. I'll always come for you, Damien said fiercely. Always, no matter what. They stayed under the water until it ran cold, holding each other, washing away the worst of the day. When they finally emerged, Damien wrapped Claire in a towel and carried her to bed despite her protests that she could walk. Humor me, he said, setting her down gently. Claire caught his wrist before he could pull away. Stay with me. I'm not going anywhere, Damien promised. He climbed into bed beside her, pulling her into his arms. Sleep, Claire. I've got you. And for the first time since Savannah had appeared at the penthouse, Claire felt safe enough to close her eyes. The next morning arrived with headlines that made Claire's stomach drop. Damien was already awake, sitting up in bed with his tablet, his expression carved from stone. Claire sat up beside him, and he wordlessly turned the screen so she could see. Blackwood Empire crumbles. Kidnapping, fraud, and family betrayal, read the main headline. Below it were photos. Eleanor, Richard, and Savannah in handcuffs being led into the police station. The article detailed everything: the kidnapping, the extortion attempt, the fake photos, and the decades of financial mismanagement that Damien had uncovered in his investigation. But it was the secondary headline that caught Claire's attention. From invisible to invincible, Claire crosses journey from adopted daughter to mafia queen. Mafia queen? Claire said, her voice strangled. The press loves a good story, Damien said neutrally, and ours is fascinating to them. Claire read through the article, her hands shaking. It detailed her childhood with the Blackwoods, her treatment as an outsider in her own family, her marriage to Damien, and now the kidnapping. The journalist had painted her as a Cinderella story, the forgotten daughter who'd found her prince, albeit a dangerous one. They're calling you a victim, Damien said, watching her face carefully. Are you okay with that? Claire thought about it. A month ago, she would have hated the attention, would have wanted to disappear, but now? I was a victim, Claire said slowly, but I'm not anymore. And if this story helps other people who feel invisible see that they can escape, then I'm okay with it. Pride flickered across Damien's face. You're incredible. You know that? Before Claire could respond, his phone rang. Damien glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. I need to take this, he said, kissing her forehead before stepping onto the balcony. Claire watched him through the glass, seeing the tension in his shoulders as he spoke. When he came back inside, his expression was unreadable. That was my lawyer, Damien said. The Blackwoods want to make a deal. Claire's stomach twisted. What kind of deal? They'll plead guilty to reduce charges and give up all claims to you in exchange for avoiding federal prosecution on the fraud charges. Damien sat beside her, taking her hands. The decision is yours, Claire. If you want them to face the full weight of justice, we can make that happen. But it'll mean a very public trial. You'll have to testify. Every detail of your life with them will be examined. Claire thought about sitting in a courtroom, facing the Blackwoods across an aisle, reliving every moment of cruelty and abandonment for a jury of strangers. The thought made her feel sick. What do you think I should do? She asked. I think, Damien said carefully, that you've already won. They've lost everything. Their money, their reputation, their freedom. They'll spend years in prison regardless of the deal. The question is whether you need to see them punished further or whether you're ready to move on. Claire looked down at their joined hands. Damien's knuckles were still bruised from the fight at the warehouse. He'd torn apart an entire criminal network to get to her. He'd destroyed the Blackwood Empire in less than 24 hours. He'd done all of it for her. "I want to move on," Claire said quietly. "I want to build a life that has nothing to do with them. I don't want to give them any more of my time or energy." Damien's expression softened. "Then we accept the deal." "Just like that?" "Just like that," Damien confirmed. "You're in control here, Claire, always. This is your choice and I support it." Claire felt something loosen in her chest, some final thread connecting her to the Blackwoods that had been holding her back. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me the choice, for making me feel like I matter." Damien cupped her face gently. "You do matter. More than anything, Jad." The deal was finalized within 48 hours. The Blackwoods pleaded guilty to kidnapping, extortion, and various fraud charges. They were sentenced to 15 years each, less than they deserved, but enough to ensure they'd never hurt anyone again. Claire didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to see them broken and defeated. She'd already moved on. Instead, she spent the day with Damien at a property he owned outside the city. A sprawling estate with gardens and stables and enough space to breathe without feeling the weight of the city pressing down. "I bought this place years ago," Damien said as they walked through the grounds. "Always thought I'd retire here someday. Away from the business, away from the chaos." "It's beautiful," Claire said, taking in the rolling hills and peaceful quiet. Damien stopped walking, turning to face her. "I want you to have it." Claire blinked. "What?" "The estate. I'm signing it over to you. In your name only." Damien's expression was serious. "I want you to have something that's entirely yours, Claire. Something no one can take from you. Something that's yours whether you stay with me or not." Claire's throat tightened. "Why would you think I'd leave?" "I don't," Damien said. "But I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you feel like you have to. I want you to know that you have options. Freedom. A safety net." "I don't want a safety net," Claire said, stepping closer to him. "I want you." Damien's eyes darkened. "Claire, I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Damien. You saw me when no one else did. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. You gave me back my life." Damien was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, really smiled, bright and genuine and absolutely devastating. "I've loved you since the Vanderbilt Gala," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I've loved you since I watched you stand alone in that sculpture garden, looking like you'd forgotten anyone was watching. I've loved you through every plan, every preparation, every moment I spent waiting for the right time to bring you home." "This is home?" Claire asked, looking around at the estate. "Wherever you are is home," Damien corrected, then kissed her until she forgot how to think. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Claire felt lighter than she had in years. Maybe ever. "So what happens now?" she asked. Damien considered the question, his thumb tracing circles on her hip. "Now we build a life together. The kind of life you deserve, the kind where you're seen and valued and protected." "What about your business?" Claire asked carefully. She knew what Damien was, what he did, the violence and danger that came with his world. "I'm transitioning out," Damien said, surprising her. "I've been planning it for a while. Most of my operations are already legitimate. The rest I'm selling off to trusted associates. In 6 months, I'll be entirely clean." "Because of me?" "Because of us," Damien corrected. "I want to give you a life where you don't have to worry about danger around every corner, where you can be happy without looking over your shoulder." Claire stared at him. "You'd give up your empire for me?" "In a heartbeat," Damien said simply. "You're more important than any of it, Claire. You're the only thing that matters." Tears stung Claire's eyes. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You survived," Damien said fiercely. "You endured years of cruelty and came out the other side still kind, still strong, still beautiful. That's extraordinary, Claire. You're extraordinary." They stayed at the estate until sunset, planning a future that felt almost too good to be real. Damien wanted to start a foundation, something that helped children in situations like Claire's, kids who felt invisible and forgotten. Claire loved the idea, started brainstorming programs and initiatives right there in the garden. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had purpose, like she mattered, like she belonged. 3 weeks later, Claire stood in front of a mirror in Damien's penthouse, their penthouse, and barely recognized herself. Not because of the designer dress, or the professional styling, or the expensive jewelry, but because of the look in her eyes. Confident, strong, unbreakable. Tonight was the annual Charity Foundation Gala, the same event where Diana Castellano had first approached her, but this time Claire wasn't attending as the invisible wife of a dangerous man. She was attending as a force in her own right. The foundation she and Damien had created, Sanctuary, had already made waves in the city. They'd opened 3 group homes for displaced children, started scholarship programs, and provided resources for families in crisis. The press had loved it, calling Claire a philanthropist and humanitarian. She still didn't quite believe it was real. "You look stunning," Damien said from the doorway. Claire turned to find him watching her with that familiar intensity that still made her heart race. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, all sharp lines and controlled power. "Ready to face the sharks again?" he asked, offering his arm. Claire took it without hesitation. "With you? Always." The gala was everything she remembered and more. Glittering crowds, expensive champagne, conversations that masked judgments and calculations. But this time, people approached Claire directly, asked about her foundation, praised her work, treated her like she mattered, because she did. Diana Castellano swept over within minutes of their arrival, her smile warm and genuine. "Claire, Damien, so wonderful to see you both. I've been following Sanctuary's progress. Absolutely remarkable work." "Thank you," Claire said, surprised by how easily the words came. "We're hoping to open 2 more locations by next year." "Marvelous. You must tell me all about it over lunch next week. I have some donors who'd be very interested in supporting your cause." After Diana drifted away, Damien leaned down to murmur in Claire's ear. "You're a natural at this." "I had a good teacher," Claire said, squeezing his hand. They made their rounds through the crowd, Claire growing more comfortable with each conversation. She was discussing expansion plans with a potential donor when she saw them. Eleanor, Richard, and Savannah Blackwood. Not in person. They were still in prison. But a reporter had cornered an older couple near the bar, and Claire could hear fragments of the conversation. "Such a shame about the Blackwoods. Always thought they were respectable. Turns out they were monsters all along. And that poor girl they adopted." Claire felt Damien tense beside her, felt his protective instincts kick in. But she didn't need protecting. Not anymore. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "You sure?" "I'm sure." And she was. The Blackwoods were part of her past, a painful, difficult part, but they didn't define her. They didn't control her. They were nothing but a cautionary tale now. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and connections. By the time they returned to the penthouse, Claire's feet ached from her heels, and her face hurt from smiling, but she felt genuinely happy. "That was exhausting," she said, collapsing onto the couch. Damien sat beside her, pulling her feet into his lap and starting to massage them. "But successful. You made at least a dozen new connections tonight." "We did," Claire corrected. "This is our foundation, Damien. Our work." "Our life," Damien agreed, his eyes soft. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Then Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Claire's breath caught. "What's that?" "Your wedding ring was chosen by the Blackwoods," Damien said. "I want to give you one that means something. One that represents us, not them." He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, a deep emerald surrounded by diamonds, elegant and unique. "Emerald for the dress you wore the night I knew you were falling for me too," Damien explained. "And diamonds because you're precious and unbreakable." Claire's vision blurred with tears as he slipped it onto her finger, replacing the band the Blackwoods had chosen. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect," Damien corrected, pulling her into his arms. "And you're mine. Forever." "Forever," Claire agreed, and kissed him like she meant it. Because she did. This life, this love, this absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. It was everything she'd never dared to hope for. And it was only the beginning. Later that night, As Claire lay in Damien's arms on the edge of sleep, her phone buzzed with an email notification. She almost ignored it, but something made her check. It was from Savannah. Claire's first instinct was to delete it without reading, but curiosity won out. The email was short, bitter, desperate. You won. Are you happy now? You took everything from us. Our money, our reputation, our freedom. Was it worth it, Claire? Was destroying your family worth playing queen in Damien Cross's world? We gave you everything. A home, a name, opportunities you never would have had. And you threw it all back in our faces for what? A man who'll probably discard you the moment he gets bored? Enjoy your victory. But remember, you're not special, you're just convenient. And when he realizes that, you'll be alone again, just like you've always been. Savannah Claire read the email twice, waiting for the familiar sting of doubt, the old insecurities to resurface. They didn't. Instead, she felt nothing but pity. Savannah was sitting in a prison cell, stripped of everything she'd once taken for granted, and she still couldn't understand that the problem wasn't Claire. It was them. It had always been them. Claire deleted the email without responding and set her phone aside. "Everything okay?" Damien murmured, his arm tightening around her. "Everything's perfect," Claire said honestly. And it was. The Blackwoods could rot in their bitterness and regret. Claire had found something they'd never understand. Real love, real partnership, real freedom. She'd found herself. And nothing they said or did could ever take that away. 6 months after Savannah's bitter email, Claire stood in the main hall of Sanctuary's newest facility, a converted mansion on the edge of the city that would house 20 children who needed a safe place to call home. Sunlight streamed through the restored windows, illuminating freshly painted walls in warm, welcoming colors. The space hummed with the energy of volunteers hanging artwork, arranging furniture, and transforming cold rooms into spaces that felt like hope. Claire walked through the halls with a clipboard, checking off final preparations, barely aware of the photographer from Metropolitan Magazine trailing behind her. They were doing a feature story on Sanctuary's expansion, and though Claire still wasn't entirely comfortable with media attention, she'd learned it was a necessary tool for helping more children. "Mrs. Cross, can we get a few shots of you in the library?" the photographer asked. "The light is incredible in there." Claire nodded, leading the way to a room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that Damien had insisted on filling with every title she'd loved as a child. A reading nook sat in the corner, complete with plush cushions and a window seat that overlooked the gardens. As the photographer worked, Claire's mind drifted to the board meeting she'd led that morning. Sanctuary had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. 5 homes now, with 2 more in development, plus educational programs and mental health services. She'd hired a full staff, established partnerships with schools and hospitals, and created a model that other cities were starting to replicate. The invisible girl who'd once hidden in corners at Blackwood charity events was now running a foundation that changed lives. "That's perfect," the photographer said, snapping a final shot. "I think we have everything we need. The article should run next month." After she left, Claire stood alone in the library, running her fingers along the spines of books. The silence felt peaceful rather than lonely, a distinction she'd learned to appreciate over the past months. Her phone buzzed, a text from Damien. "How's the new facility looking?" "Beautiful," Claire typed back. "You should see the library. The kids are going to love it. I can't wait to see it." "And you? Home by 6? I'll be there." Claire smiled, pocketing her phone. Even after months together, Damien's texts still made her heart flutter. He'd kept his promise about transitioning out of his old business. Most of his operations were now completely legitimate, and the few remaining gray areas would be gone by year's end. They'd built a life that was stable, safe, and entirely theirs. "Ms. Cross?" A volunteer poked her head into the library. "There's someone here to see you. Says her name is Rebecca Morrison. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seems really determined to speak with you." Claire frowned. The name wasn't familiar. Did she say what it's about? Just that it's personal. Against her better judgment, Claire followed the volunteer to the front office. A woman in her late 30s stood by the window, her posture rigid with tension. She had dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail and wore jeans and a faded sweater. When she turned, Claire saw exhaustion in her eyes, and something else, desperation. "Mrs. Cross," the woman said, her voice tight. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm Rebecca Morrison. I need your help. Claire gestured to a chair. Please, sit. What's going on? Rebecca perched on the edge of the seat, her hands twisting in her lap. I read about Sanctuary in the paper, about how you help children in difficult situations, and I thought, maybe you could help my daughter. How old is your daughter? 16. Her name is Lily. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. My ex-husband. He's not a good man. He has money, connections, lawyers, and he's trying to get custody of Lily, even though he's been absent her entire life. But the courts, they're listening to him because he can afford to make himself look good. Claire's chest tightened. She knew this story, had lived a version of it. What does Lily want? To stay with me, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. But I can't afford the kind of legal help I need. I work 2 jobs just to keep our apartment. I've tried legal aid, but they're overwhelmed. And my ex, he's just doing this to hurt me. He doesn't even want her. He just wants to win. Why come to me? Claire asked gently. Rebecca met her eyes. Because you understand. I read about what the Blackwoods did to you, how they treated you like you didn't matter. You know what it's like to be powerless. And I thought, maybe you'd help us not be powerless too. Something shifted in Claire's chest. This was why she'd started Sanctuary, not just to provide housing and resources, but to give people back their power when the world tried to take it away. Tell me everything, Claire said, pulling out her phone to take notes. Every detail. And then we're going to fix this. Oh. That evening, Claire sat at the kitchen island in the penthouse, her laptop open, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke with the 5th lawyer she'd called that day. I understand you're busy, but this case is time-sensitive, Claire said firmly. The custody hearing is in 3 weeks. We need someone who can… Yes, I'm aware of your usual retainer. That's not an issue. Money isn't the problem here. The problem is finding someone who actually cares about protecting a child. Damien appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, his expression curious. Claire held up a finger, mouthing 1 minute as she wrapped up the call. Thank you. Yes, I'll send over the case files tonight. I appreciate you taking this on. She hung up and let out a long breath. What's going on? Damien asked, crossing to her. Claire explained the situation with Rebecca and Lily, watching as Damien's expression shifted from interest to understanding to something fierce. You want to help them, he said. It wasn't a question. I need to help them, Claire corrected. Damien, this girl is the same age I was when Savannah was born, and everything changed. She's watching her entire life get decided by adults who see her as a trophy or a weapon. I can't just let that happen. Damien was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then he pulled out his own phone. I know someone. Judge Rachel Chen. She's fair, honest, and she hates parents who use their kids as pawns. If she's assigned to this case, Lily has a real chance. Can you make that happen? I can make a call, Damien said. But Claire, you need to be careful. Getting involved in custody battles can get messy. Are you sure you want to put yourself in that position? Yes, Claire said without hesitation. This is exactly why we started Sanctuary, to help people who can't help themselves. Pride flickered across Damien's face. Then we'll help them together. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire threw herself into Rebecca and Lily's case with the same intensity she'd brought to building Sanctuary. She hired the best family law attorney in the city, arranged for Rebecca to meet with a financial advisor to help organize her records, and even sat down with Lily herself to understand what she wanted. The girl was quiet, guarded, with her mother's dark hair and eyes that had seen too much too soon. She reminded Claire painfully of herself at that age. I just want to stay with my mom, Lily said, sitting in Sanctuary's library, the same spot where Claire had stood just weeks before. I don't understand why that's so hard for everyone to accept. Because sometimes adults forget that children are people too, Claire said gently. They forget that you have feelings and opinions that matter. Did that happen to you? Lily asked. With the Blackwood family? Claire had been honest in interviews about her past, wanting to destigmatize the experience of children who felt unwanted or invisible. It meant that people like Lily knew her story. Yes, Claire said. For a long time, I felt like what I wanted didn't matter, like I was just a piece in someone else's game. How did you get out? I got lucky, Claire admitted. I married someone who saw me as a person first. But you shouldn't need luck, Lily. You should have people fighting for you because you deserve it, and that's what we're going to do. The custody hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Claire sat in the courtroom beside Rebecca, watching as Lily's father, a man in an expensive suit with cold eyes, presented his case with the help of 3 lawyers. He painted himself as a concerned parent who'd finally gotten his life together and wanted to give his daughter the opportunities she deserved. It was a compelling performance. A lie, but compelling. When it was Rebecca's turn, their attorney presented evidence of years of abandonment, missed child support payments, and witness testimony from teachers and neighbors about Rebecca's dedication to her daughter. But the ex-husband's lawyers countered each point with smooth efficiency. Then the judge, Rachel Chen, thanks to a strategically placed call from Damien, asked to speak with Lily privately. The wait was excruciating. Claire watched Rebecca's hands shake, watched her former husband's smug confidence, and felt rage building in her chest. Finally, Judge Chen returned with Lily and called the courtroom to order. "I've reviewed all the evidence and spoken extensively with Lily," Judge Chen said, her voice carrying authority. "And I've come to a decision." The courtroom held its breath. Custody will remain with the mother, Rebecca Morrison, with no visitation rights granted to the father unless and until he can demonstrate a consistent pattern of parental involvement and care. Judge Chen fixed Lily's father with a cold stare. "Using your child as a weapon against your ex-wife is not parenting, it's abuse, and this court will not enable it." Rebecca burst into tears. Lily grabbed her mother's hand, relief washing over her face, and Claire felt something loosen in her chest, a vindication she hadn't known she needed. As they left the courthouse, Rebecca pulled Claire into a fierce hug. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing us, for helping us." "You're not alone anymore," Claire said firmly. "If you need anything, anything at all, Sanctuary is here." That night, Claire and Damien celebrated with quiet dinner at home. As they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, Claire felt a profound sense of peace. "You changed that girl's life today," Damien said, his arm around her shoulders. "We changed it," Claire corrected. "I couldn't have done it without your help." "You would have found a way," Damien said confidently. "You're remarkable, Claire, you know that?" "I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for me," Claire said quietly, "which is exactly what makes you remarkable." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness fell. Claire thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, frightened, invisible, convinced she had no value. And she thought about who she was now, confident, purposeful, surrounded by love and possibility. The transformation still sometimes felt surreal. "I got a call today," Damien said after a while. "From the Blackwood's lawyer." Claire tensed. What did they want? "Eleanor is dying," Damien said carefully. "Cancer. She has maybe 3 months. She wants to see you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire's first instinct was to refuse, to let Eleanor face death alone the same way she'd made Claire face life alone. But something held her back. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. "I think," Damien said slowly, "that this isn't about her, it's about you, whether you need closure or whether you're already past it." Claire considered the question seriously. Did she need to see Eleanor one last time? To hear an apology that would probably never come? To witness the woman who'd hurt her reduced to mortality? "No," she said finally. "I don't need closure. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not hurt. I'm just done. They're part of my past and I'm focused on my future." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Claire turned to face Damien fully. "They don't get any more of my time or energy. I've built something beautiful out of the ashes they left me in. That's enough." Damien kissed her forehead. "I love you. I love you too." 3 months later, Claire stood at a podium in front of 500 people at the Metropolitan Hotel's Grand Ballroom. The annual Sanctuary Gala had become one of the city's premier charity events, and this year they'd raised over $3 million in a single night. But the money wasn't what made Claire's hands shake as she prepared to speak. It was the award she was about to accept, the Humanitarian of the Year honor from the National Children's Advocacy Foundation. "Our final award tonight goes to someone who has transformed the landscape of child welfare in this city," the presenter was saying. "In just 1 year, she's created a model that cities across the country are adopting. She's given voice to the voiceless and home to the homeless. Ladies and gentlemen, Claire Cross. The applause was thunderous as Claire took the stage. She looked out at the crowd, donors, volunteers, politicians, fellow advocates, and saw Damien in the front row, pride written all over his face. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "A year ago, I didn't think I had anything valuable to offer the world. I'd spent most of my life believing I was invisible, that I didn't matter, that my experiences had only made me broken." She paused, letting the words settle. "But I was wrong. My experiences made me strong. They taught me empathy, resilience, and the absolute necessity of seeing people who society overlooks. Every child who comes through Sanctuary's doors is seen, is valued, is told that they matter, because they do." Claire's gaze swept the crowd, landing on several Sanctuary kids who'd been invited to attend, including Lily Morrison, who sat with her mother, both of them beaming. "This award isn't mine alone. It belongs to every volunteer who gives their time, every donor who gives their resources, every advocate who gives their voice to children who need it. It belongs to the kids themselves, who survive circumstances that would break most adults and still find ways to hope." She held up the crystal award, letting the light catch it. "And it belongs to the people who see potential where others see problems, who see strength where others see scars, who see the invisible and refuse to look away." Her eyes found Damien's. "Thank you for seeing me, and for helping me see myself." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. After the gala, Claire and Damien escaped to their estate outside the city, both exhausted but happy. They walked through the gardens in the moonlight, comfortable in the silence that had become their favorite form of communication. "Eleanor died yesterday," Damien said quietly. "I got the notification this morning. Didn't want to tell you before your speech." Claire absorbed the information, waiting for grief or anger or something sharp to cut through her. But she felt only a distant sadness, not for Eleanor specifically, but for the waste of it all. The years Eleanor had spent being cruel when she could have chosen kindness. "Did she ever apologize?" Claire asked. "No. According to the lawyer, she maintained until the end that she'd done nothing wrong, that you were the ungrateful one." Claire nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad I didn't go see her. Some people never change, and there's no point waiting for them to." "What about Richard and Savannah?" "What about them?" "They're still in prison. Will be for another decade at least. Do you ever think about them?" Claire considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with anger anymore. Mostly, I just feel sorry for them. They had everything and they threw it away because they couldn't see past their own selfishness." "You're a better person than I am," Damien said. "I still want to make them suffer." Claire laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. "That's because you love me. It's sweet, in a terrifying way." "I do love you," Damien said, stopping to pull her into his arms. "More than I thought possible. You've made me want to be better, Claire. To build something that matters instead of just accumulating power." "You were always better than you thought," Claire said. "You just needed someone to see it." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other under the stars. Then Damien pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious. "Marry me again," he said. Claire blinked. "We're already married." "I know, but the first time was for them. The Blackwoods, the business deal, all of it. I want to marry you again, just for us. A ceremony where you choose me because you want to, not because you have to." Tears stung Claire's eyes. "Damien Cross, are you asking me to renew our vows?" "I'm asking you to marry me like we should have from the beginning," Damien said. "With friends and family and celebration, with you in a dress you choose, saying words that mean something. Will you?" "Yes," Claire said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." The second wedding took place 3 months later at their estate, in the gardens Claire had fallen in love with. It was small, just 50 people they actually cared about. Marcus stood as Damien's best man. Rebecca Morrison and her daughter Lily were there, along with several other Sanctuary families. Diana Castellano attended, having become a genuine friend and major Sanctuary supporter. Claire wore a dress she'd chosen herself, simple, elegant, ivory silk that made her feel beautiful without trying to be someone she wasn't. Damien wore a dark suit and looked at her like she was the only person in the world. This time, when Claire walked down the aisle, no one was giving her away. She walked alone, by choice, toward a future she was choosing freely. "We're gathered here today," the officiant began, "to witness the renewal of vows between Damien and Claire Cross, and I'm told the couple has written their own promises to each other." Damien went first, taking Claire's hands in his. "Claire, a year ago I married you to save you from people who didn't deserve you. Today, I'm marrying you because I can't imagine my life without you in it. You've made me better, softer, more human. You've shown me that real strength isn't about power or control. It's about choosing kindness when the world has given you every reason to be cruel. I promise to spend the rest of my life protecting you, cherishing you, and helping you build the world you deserve. I'm yours. Completely. Forever." Claire's voice trembled as she spoke her own vows. "Damien, you saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I thought I was worthless. You gave me not just safety and security, but the freedom to discover who I could be. Because of you, I learned that I'm strong, that I matter, that my past doesn't define my future. I promise to stand beside you, to build our life together, to love you fiercely and honestly for all the days we have. You're my home, my partner, my everything." They exchanged new rings, matching bands engraved with coordinates of the spot where they were standing, a permanent reminder of the moment they chose each other freely. When the officiant pronounced them married and Damien kissed her, the small crowd erupted in applause. But Claire barely heard it. She was too focused on the man in front of her, the life they'd built, the future stretching out ahead of them, bright with possibility. The reception was everything the first wedding hadn't been: joyful, genuine, filled with people who actually cared about them. Claire danced with Damien as the sun set, watched children from Sanctuary play in the gardens, and felt so full of happiness she thought she might burst. "Happy," Damien murmured as they swayed together. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Claire admitted. "Good, because I have one more surprise for you." He led her away from the party to a quiet corner of the estate where a small structure had been built. A cottage, charming and private, with a sign over the door that read Claire's Studio. "What is this?" Claire asked, confused. "Your space," Damien said. "I know you love the estate, but I wanted you to have somewhere that's entirely yours. Somewhere you can write, read, think, create, whatever you want. No foundation business, no distractions, just you." Claire walked inside to find a beautiful room filled with light. Built-in bookshelves lined the walls, a comfortable reading nook sat by the window, and a desk overlooked the gardens. It was perfect. "Damien," she breathed, "this is incredible." "You've spent so much time taking care of everyone else," Damien said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I wanted to make sure you had space to take care of yourself too." Claire turned in his arms, kissing him deeply. "Thank you. For this. For everything. For seeing me. Always," Damien promised, "for the rest of our lives." 5 years later, Claire stood in that same studio, now filled with evidence of the life she'd built. Photos of Sanctuary events lined the walls, framed news articles about their expanding programs, letters from families they'd helped, a shelf full of awards she'd received for her advocacy work. But the most precious items were scattered across her desk: crayon drawings from current Sanctuary kids, thank you cards from teenagers who'd aged out of the system and come back to visit, updates from families who'd found stability and happiness. Claire was finishing up plans for Sanctuary's 10th location when her phone rang. She smiled when she saw the caller ID. "Lily Morrison," Claire said warmly. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "Hi, Claire," Lily's voice was bright with excitement. "I just got my acceptance letter. Full scholarship to Columbia. I'm going to college." Pride swelled in Claire's chest. Lily was 21 now, confident and ambitious, studying social work so she could help families like her own had been helped. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," Lily said. "Without Sanctuary. You changed my life, Claire." "You changed your own life," Claire corrected gently. "You put in the work, made the choices, fought for your future. I just made sure you had the support you deserved." After they hung up, Claire sat back in her chair, looking out at the gardens where children from their newest Sanctuary facility were playing. Damien had bought the neighboring property 6 months ago and converted it into an expansion of their original vision. Not just a home, but a whole campus with educational facilities, therapy centers, and recreational spaces. The doorbell of her studio chimed. Marcus appeared looking exactly as he had 5 years ago, steady, reliable, protective. "Mrs. Cross, there's someone here to see you. Says she knew you years ago. Name's Amanda Winters." Claire frowned, searching her memory. Then it clicked. Amanda Winters had been another girl at the Blackwood charity events. One of the few people who'd been kind to Claire when everyone else ignored her. "Send her in." Amanda looked much the same. Kind eyes, warm smile, though now she carried herself with a professional confidence that suggested success. "Claire Cross," Amanda said, shaking her head in wonder. "I've been following your work for years. Sanctuary is incredible." "Thank you. It's good to see you, Amanda. What brings you here?" Amanda's expression turned serious. "I'm a family court judge now, and I've been assigned a case that reminded me of you. A girl, 15, adopted into a wealthy family that treats her like staff. They're fighting to keep her because appearances matter more than her well-being." Claire's entire body went still. "Tell me everything." They talked for 2 hours, Claire taking detailed notes, her mind already working through strategies. This was what she did now, found the invisible children and made sure they were seen, made sure they mattered. When Amanda left, Claire immediately called Damien. "I need to take a case," she said when he answered. "A girl in a situation like mine was. Can you—" "Already cleared your schedule," Damien interrupted. "I figured you'd say yes the moment you heard. What do you need?" "A lawyer. A good one. And maybe some of that cross-family influence with the right people. Consider it done. I love you, warrior." "I love you too." Over the next months, Claire fought for the girl, whose name was Emma, with the same fierce determination she'd brought to every case since Lily's. She testified in court about her own experiences, connected Emma with therapists and advocates, and made sure the girl knew she wasn't alone. When the judge ruled in Emma's favor, granting her emancipation and placing her in Sanctuary's care, Claire felt the same satisfaction she always did. Another life changed, another child saved. Emma came to live at the estate's Sanctuary campus, and Claire made it her mission to help the girl find herself the way she'd been helped to find herself. They spent hours in the library, Emma slowly opening up about her experiences, Claire sharing her own story. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked one afternoon. "Fighting back against your family? Starting over?" Claire thought about the question, thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. "Not for a second," she said honestly. "The Blackwoods gave me a home, but they never gave me love. Damien gave me both. And more importantly, he gave me the freedom to discover who I was without them. I want that," Emma said quietly. "To know who I am." "You will," Claire promised. "It takes time, but you'll get there, and we'll be here every step of the way." That evening, Claire and Damien sat on their balcony, a ritual they'd maintained through 5 years of marriage. The city sprawled below them, full of lights and life and possibility. "Emma asked me today if I ever regretted fighting back," Claire said. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that it was the best decision I ever made." Damien pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've saved so many kids, Claire. Changed so many lives." "We have," Claire corrected. "This is our work, Damien. Our legacy." "Speaking of legacy," Damien said carefully, "how would you feel about adding to ours?" Claire turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Damien said, his eyes warm, "that we've spent 5 years helping other people's children, and I've been thinking, maybe it's time we had one of our own, if you want that." Claire's breath caught. They talked about children before, but always vaguely, someday. The thought of bringing a child into the world they'd built, a world of safety and love and infinite possibility, felt right in a way that made her chest ache. "Yes," she whispered. "I want that. I want everything with you." Damien smiled, that rare, brilliant smile that still made her heart flutter. "Then let's build it together." 2 years later, Claire sat in her studio with their daughter asleep in a bassinet beside her. Rose Elena Cross had her father's dark hair and her mother's eyes, and she was the most beautiful thing Claire had ever seen. As Claire worked on Sanctuary's expansion plans, They were up to 15 locations now, with 20 more in development across the country. She occasionally glanced at her daughter, still amazed that this was her life. She had a husband who loved her fiercely, a daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted, cherished, seen, a foundation that changed lives, a purpose that mattered. The invisible girl who'd once believed she was worthless had become a woman who knew her value, who'd built an empire of compassion and change. And somewhere in a prison hundreds of miles away, Savannah Blackwood would spend another 8 years behind bars, knowing that the sister she'd tormented had risen higher than the Blackwoods ever had. But Claire didn't think about that anymore. Didn't think about them at all, really. She'd stopped looking back years ago. Because her future, the one she'd built with Damien, the one she was creating for Rose, the one she was making possible for hundreds of children like Emma, was too bright to waste time on shadows from her past. Claire Cross had found her power, her voice, her place in the world, and she was never going to be invisible again.